Shalom and welcome to a very special edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me and my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School, Long Island, and somewhere in the refurbished Anshe Chesed, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky. Tell me where you are.
Well, our offices were always in the kind of carved out of a back storage place in the closet, and they were terrible. And now we actually have built nice offices on the fifth floor of our building, and I'm in the computer room because the construction is still going on, but there was air conditioning in this room, and my office is sweltering. So I moved
Very
where it was
cool.
cold.
Well, context is everything, and location is everything, and that's where we're going to go because we are located in Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and we have coming up Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and I'm gonna just put out the most interesting feature of Shabbat Chol HaMoed is the custom of reading the book of Kohelet. Can you give me your favorite line in the book of Kohelet, or give me drop some wisdom here?
A living dog is better than a dead lion.
Okay.
I guess it depends whether you're the dog or the lion.
Do you have a favorite?
Why do you like that, Jeremy?
I actually, when I was younger, I used to love Kohelet. I thought he was snarky and just so contrarian. I used to find that really attractive. And of course, in some ways, I still do. There's a lot of humor in this book. But in the end, I no longer feel quite as, I no longer relate quite as much to his like nasty edge. A little bit like that. I mean, I like that line because I think it's kind of funny, the whatever the dead flies and the perfumer's ointment and stuff like that. And life is so hard, and life is such a waste, and there's a lot of wisdom in the book, but in the end of the day, I think that there's some despair in ways that doesn't really sit right with me.
It's got the anguish of the human condition.
I think, but there's so much more there. So if you would ask me for my favorite line today, I would say all rivers run to the sea, which was the phrase that Elie Wiesel Zal used for one of his memoirs.
Yes.
And when I hear that line, I think of the rush of the ocean with the waves crashing in, and you look out and you realize that that's where the water is going. Yeah. And it's an endless cycle, and one can feel really small and be depressed, or one can feel enlarged because there's a kind of oneness with nature. And I think, what I find interesting, many, many years ago in Hebrew school, it first came across the idea, traditionally Solomon wrote Kohelet along with Mishlei and Shir HaShirim. So as a young man, he wrote Shir HaShirim. He was a romantic. He went to school, he wrote Mishlei, and then as an old man, he was cynical and he wrote Kohelet. But I think that as I move into the autumn of my life, I suppose, that I don't feel cynical, I feel restored in a certain way. I've lived as long as I've lived, and I feel good about it. Certainly I can't do things I could have done 30, 40 years ago. On the other hand, I know so much more about myself, about the world, about God, perhaps. So I see it as being restorative, and it's important at this time of year.
I love the third chapter. Just that's my go-to chapter whenever I need a piece of wisdom. There's a time for everything under the sun. Lakol zman tachat Hashem ve'et l'kol chefetz tachat hashamayim. How does it go? The kol
zman
ve'et l'kol chefetz tachat hashamayim. A season for everything and a time for every experience under heaven. I don't know how many funerals I've started off with that text, and it's the go-to text for understanding that life has seasons, that you go through seasons in your life, and that as you describe, so beautifully, Barry, I don't want to say you're in the autumn of your years. That's Frank Sinatra. That's so great, But Frank understood that. He totally understood this,
Well, he was a New Jersey boy,
he was a New Jersey boy.
as you became once you immigrated.
I'm in the autumn of my years.
But I just want to add, in addition to the seasons in that passage, there's also a rhythm. And I think that there's a music here that we sense. You know, the medievals talked about the music of the spheres. And there's a little bit of that. And, you know, part of that text was made into a song.
Indeed, indeed, and it just works for everything. It works. I can't tell you again. I think it's the wisest thing that anybody has ever said is that there's a time for everything under the sun.
Well, it's certainly true. There is a time for everything, and I especially use that around funerals at Eighth Likroa. There's a time for ripping, but you know, Kohelet. So it alternates. I mean, this is the reason that the book is so rich for interpreting, because on the one hand, he says, you know, life is just totally stupid. God twisted it up, and you know, nobody can fix what God has already twisted, and you know, everything is hevel u'reut ruach, and rov chokhmah, rov ka'as. The more wise you are, the angrier you get at how terrible and unfair things are. And so sometimes when he says those lovely things about, so enjoy life with a spouse and have the sunshine as long as you can, sometimes people can interpret it as, listen, life is really hard. So try to grab hold of those moments of light that you can enjoy. And that gives it proper perspective. And sometimes people think that it means that he's just taunting you, which is like, so you may as well go get drunk because this is just stupid. And the inyan ra. God gave an inyan ra l'bnei adam le'anot bo. It gave us something really bad to have to deal with. And when I was younger, I used to think that was like. And so I think, by the way, in the midrash that Barry said about the middle-aged Mishle and the old Kohelet, I would go with actually the snarky teenager as Kohelet. You know, oh, this is all so stupid. Could you know? Wasn't there in that sketch show that we watched? What was that called? Yehudim Ba'im. That they had Shlomo as Kohelet, as this like depressed teenager, and I would like to ultimately leave behind. You know, when Barry said all the rivers run to the sea, which is true, but it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. Kol devarim yegeim. And everything is wearisome. I would like to move ultimately beyond that. But the way it works in the calendar, I think, is, and this part I do like, is that Sukkot is a little bittersweet. Sukkot is a celebration. And as autumn comes on, you know, you feel a little bit of death, and Kohelet sort of captures that sense of vulnerability and mortality in a way that is part of the entire Sukkot vibe, I think.
Okay, so
I wanted to add one thing. So you were talking, Jeremy, about twisting, and I don't know if I have the words right, but there's the line "chut mishulash lo yinateh." So sometimes something that's twisted has a positive value, and I think what we see sometimes in Kohelet is that the reason why everything has a season is because we look at it one way, we see something, and sometime later we see something entirely different, even the opposite, and we realize that life embraces both. That it's not an either or, it's a both.
So speaking of seasons and the fact that we are wistful at this time, the autumn of the year, and of course it's much more pronounced here in North America, where we are feeling. Although I have to say, even you know, we haven't yet got that little crispness yet. It's still quite hot and still quite humid. But moving into Hoshanah Rabbah, which we are celebrating on Monday, which is part of the seasonal trope of the holiday. Hoshanah Rabbah is defined by the ritual in the temple and the synagogue of making 7 circuits around the Sifrei Torah, all the Sifrei Torah, walking with your lulav and etrog and saying Hoshana. These hymns that are quite complicated, quite tongue twisting, and difficult. But I maybe you have what's your relationship to Hoshanah Rabbah? Do you have an experience? Do you have an emotional valence to it? I have one. I love the day, but go ahead.
So tell us.
I love the day. I
You
think
go first, and then we'll
I
go.
want to go first. Okay, so I typically lead the davening on that day, uh, and it's a long marathon, and
And you do all the changes?
I do all the changes, and I do all the chants and everything, and I get to the last hakafa, Laman Ba'e Ba'esh Hoshana, it gets very emotional. I you say this all the time in our little talks here, but we put it all out there. And Hoshana is really about putting it all out on the bima. It's a catharsis when it works. I remember doing it at the seminary. I remember leading Hoshana as a student, and we got so into it, and it was very vibrant, and it was very exciting. There's something very primal about it. There's something, especially when you smack the willows at the end. I mean, it doesn't get much more physical in the synagogue than smacking a bunch of willow branches on the floor and having that kind of moment where it's all left there, and it literally is all left there.
So you make some really wonderful points because Hoshanah Rabbah is a day of Chol. It's a secular lay day, so to speak, but it embraces the holiday. The Chazan traditionally wears a kittel, which evokes both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the Pesach Seder. The liturgy encompasses both Shabbat and holidays and the weekday service. And it's not a holiday, but yet it has all the holidays within it.
Yeah,
And when we think of this time of year, we think of all the Jewish holidays, and Hoshana Rabbah is like a near miss. It's not quite a holiday, but in a sense, it's everything.
it's a quasi yontiv, and of course it's the end of the whole repentance atonement moment. You stop saying LeDavid on that day. Some people go to Shminatsarit even with that, but it puts a coda, it puts a bracket on the whole season. And I think we are aware of that. I think part of why it is so powerful, it's a boundary moment. It's a boundary day.
So that leads to that great midrash about Shminatsarit.
Yeah.
So
Well, before the Hoshanah Rabbah, I also like it a lot, but I think that for me part of it is the messianic, part of it, that this is this moment, the kol mevaser v'omer, the sense that semach shmo hu David be'atzmo. There is this person who's just waiting at the door after this long day and this incredibly long morning and the holiday season. It has led you someplace that is kind of redemptive. And to me, that capstone of Kol mevaser v'omer, Kol tzemach ish tzemach shmo hu David be'atzmo, Kol kumu kepushe afar hakitzu v'rananu shofnei afar. Those of you who are lying in the dust, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, wake up! Here's the moment. And of course, Mashiach has not yet arrived, as far as I'm told, maybe. But I feel like the Hoshanah Rabbah and the physical weirdness, the cathartic quality to the action of beating out the willows, and that messianic theme, really, I just find a tremendous sense of uplift.
So we move then into Shminatsarit, which is the day that we just kind of just stay a little bit longer. We're going to linger on with God and stay on this 8th day. And that's the midrash that you were referring to, Barry, right?
that the 70 sacrifices on Sukkot represent the nations of the world, and then Shminatsarit is just for the Jews and God.
And there is an intimacy here. Of course, layered onto that is the whole story, at least for the diaspora, the story of the temple, the Solomon temple dedication, chapter 8 of Kings, first book of Kings, which really one of the great stories, the great, you know, dramas, the final arrival of the the temple, the depositing of the ark in the temple, and Solomon's great prayer. And there's just so much going on in that moment with Solomon. And it's not an accident that some of the verses from that prayer that Solomon recites, some of those verses are included in the Hoshanah. V'yun dvarai ele krovim, you know, may my words be close to God. And it's such a very powerful, and it's also emotional. I find in the synagogue, Shminatsarit, the Yizkar Shminatsarit is just slightly different than all the other Yizkars, even Yom Kippur. And I think the reason is because this is it. This is the end of the whole season. And we're not only saying goodbye to, you know, we're not only remembering people, but we're remembering, you know, this is a moment in our lives. This is back to Kohelet. You know, there's a time for everything, that we are watching our seasons transpire in our lives, and that's what Shmini Atzeret does. And I think it's a great lead-in to Simchas Torah for us. And here, you know, I say it's a bonus to be in the diaspora, because we separate these 2 days, Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah. They have two different modes and two different emotional valences. In Israel, it's all one day. And I think they're
And
missing.
that's a long day.
It's a long day.
It is the longest damn day in the world.
They're missing out on something by not splitting up the days. But let's go to Simchas Torah, because there's a lot to talk about there in terms of content. You know, we get the fact that we do, you know, 7 days we circuit the synagogue, and that we walk around the Torahs, and now on Simchas Torah, the Torahs walk around with us. Very, very nice. And we sing and we dance and we're celebrating the completion of the Torah. But when it comes down to it, that last parsha, V'zot HaBracha, you want to just kind of sit on sackcloth and cry a little bit. It's dark, it's sad, it's the end. And one of the things that is sad about this is that certain things reach their resolution, but they linger with questions. God doesn't let Moses into the land. And God says, you can see the land, but you can't go in there. And we get that very poignant scene where God says to Moses, go, you know, look up and see the whole land. What does it say? Vayal Moshe mi'arvot Morav el Har Nevo, goes up to Har Nevo. And God says, Zot ha'aretz asher nishbati. This is the land. Shama lo tavor. The last words that God says to Moses, you're not going there. And how do you, I mean, that's the last recorded words in the Torah. Okay. I mean, what do you make of that? Are those departing words or something else going on?
Well, so it's interesting because it says that Moses will die al pi Adonai, at the mouth of God, which the rabbis understand to be the kiss of death, mirroring, or actually the opposite of the breathing in life in the creation story in chapter 2 of Breshit. In the sense, God is now taking the life out of Moses, literally. And from God's point of view, that's inspiration, but it's a breath in. And I think that what we come to understand with the death of Moses is that Moses dies for everyone. That, in other words, we get to the mountaintop, but we never cross over. And what carries us forward, I think, is our faith that there is a promised land. And when we come to meet God at the end, all we have is our faith, because we have no assurance other than faith that there is a next chapter. And
I want to offer another interpretation, which is that al pi Adonai, he dies as God said. And so what did God say? God said to him, die, umut. Back in Hazino, which we read last week, God said, you shall die there. And so Moses goes up and he dies there. And I find it very puzzling that Moses actually dies. If I read it correctly, He's dying of his own volition here. God says die. He said he dies, as if to say that he follows the mitzvot right to the end, even if it costs him his life. And that becomes a model of a certain kind of spirituality. I don't know, picked up by Rabbi Akiva, picked up by somewhere in Judaism. We do follow the mitzvot even at the point of our lives.
Right, but I think it's better to say perhaps that he doesn't die of his own volition, he dies of God's volition. That God wills him to die, because the description of Moses at the end, he's 120.
Right.
Reached the acme of a lived life in the Torah, going back to Sefer Breshit, where the 120 is first introduced. And he is undimmed vision and no lack of his physical strength. So he's not ready to die physically.
You're absolutely right.
But God takes him.
He's not ready to die, and the Midrash has him fighting tooth and nail to die. But
right. But I wanted to just add one last point here, is that Moses' death is a partnership with God.
Okay.
I think that's what we aspire to. In other words, Moses does not die alone. He dies al pi Adonai. And I think, in a sense, that's what we all hope for, because there's a sense of comfort, at least for me, in that image.
I want to just say that maybe he wills himself to death. I have been around people who they I don't want to say they choose the moment of their death, but it may not be so accidental that they die in a certain way at a certain time. You know, the last relative comes, the last child comes, and then the death happens, shortly thereafter. Or, in history, and here, Barry, American history has the death of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams on the same day, 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. It's what do you make of that? Did they choose to die on that day? Was it serendipity? Was it an accident?
The gray line is that Adams, who lived longer than Jefferson,
by a couple of hours,
in a different state, his last words were Jefferson still lives.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is interesting, and the fact that you said al pi Adonai, Elliot, the way you're saying this, it has a certain nice resonance, because God did say, and you will die, and God also said at the beginning of the Torah that 120 years appears to be the limit, and so Moshe is perhaps in a moment of reconciliation with that reality, and of course it is true. We have seen lots of people. We've all seen in the rabbinate. We've seen people who make it to a special event or something like that, but. The reason that I can't go there with you is the other overwhelming religious imperative is to choose life. And I cannot relate to the idea that even though we must accept our mortality, I can't relate to the divine imperative that we must, sometimes you have to love God, Alpha Pi, who you told at nishmatecha, b'chol nafshecha. I mean, you told it nefesh, you'll still love God.
So
that's true. That's true. But you can still love God, but you still have to love life. And so, to me, it makes much more sense to say that the power of the rabbinic midrash of al pi Adonai is exactly as Barry alluded to. It's the inverse of the Vayipach be'apav nishmat chaim at the very beginning of the Torah, and it's an acceptance by Moshe, but not an active choice. That doesn't work for me.
Okay, so I want to have my cake and eat it too. I agree with both of you here in the sense that it sounds absurd that Moses would do it, but I would say first of all it's well within the realm of human experience that people kind of shut down. Look. Even Mr. Spock on Star Trek, the movie, when he dies, he kind of just shuts down, okay? Right? I think if I'm not getting this wrong, the point is that, and maybe it's in other spiritual cultures where someone goes into the forest or, someone meditates himself and that's where the person dies. In other words, the person actively shuts down. And he has no choice but to do that because God says to him, I'm commanding you to do this. I don't want to do this, Moses is saying, but he's in the same place that Abraham is. Abraham doesn't want to sacrifice Isaac, but God told him to do that. And God relieves Abraham by not forcing Abraham to go through with it. And I would say here, both of you, have the compelling interpretations that God has an assist here. Moses can't will himself to death by himself. God is the assist. God gets the assist. Al Pi Hashem means he kisses him. Yeah, and the rabbis go there because the interpretation that it's only at the command of God is untenable for them. I think it's just too emotionally complicated to say, yeah, Moses was commanded. Moses, it's like halachic man. Moses is commanded. He does it without thinking, and that's that. He does exactly what he's commanded to do. No questions. It's just more. It's got more pathos than that. The rabbis fill that in.
So what do you make of the notion that we do not know where Moses is buried? So unlike a lot of other people in the Bible, it doesn't say of Moses that he sleeps with his fathers because he has no grave.
No, it says the commandment is that you will be gathered to your fathers, and then it says he has no grave. I think is the Torah's way of saying they didn't want Moses to be idolized.
Yeah, absolutely. Moses is, and here I want to throw in another thing that we've discussed in the past, and that given the nature of our seminary education is part of our peckle that we come to this with. Moshe has to die because the next book is Joshua and the conquest. And so one of the things that we have absorbed from our seminary education is that the Bible in formation may not have been a 5-book of Moses, but there may have been a 6. And the historical books, and Joshua's book is perhaps or a 6 or a 7 or into the historical books, is supposed to be the cap off of the Torah, but that's not what Jewish tradition gave us. Jewish tradition did not give us the book of the attainment of settlement in the Promised Land. By the nature of it stopping here, the Torah, the Judaism as we've inherited it, the Torah as we've inherited it, gives us a book of only journeying, never arriving. Okay, and Moshe's death sends us back to the beginning for a new, in just a couple of weeks, we'll hear Abraham, he's coming to the land. And what would it be different? How different would it have been if the Torah was a 6 cycle and we had that Moses did not die at the end, that Moses gave way at the end, gave way to the next heroic phase?
So I think that what the Torah ending where it does is what makes Moshe the hero of the Torah and allows him to become Moshe Rabbeinu, because he's all that's left at the end. It's his death, and then this note that no one like Moses ever arose again. And had the book continued and had the story continued in the land, that would have diminished Moshe, because Moshe would not have been seen as the ultimate leader, because he would have had a follower who did what he was supposed to do. And now we don't have that in the Torah. And what I was thinking before when we were talking before we started recording is that we go back to Breshit and we read just enough so that there is absolutely no sense of discord, right? We have the perfect creation story, the 6 days plus Shabbat. And the story that's left out, which the second creation story, according to modern critics, is where all the discord in the universe is going to happen, with Adam and Eve in the garden and the snake. And so we go from this death of Moses to this perfect world of creation, which I think for us living each year as we do is supposed to invite us to recreate the world each year.
It's a great, it's a beautiful interpretation. The moving from a finality of Moses' death right back to the potential of starting the world and starting the universe. It's hard for me to get too invested in that, because I see in Simchas Torah, and that's where we're at, I see in Simchas Torah something profound about the Jewish people, and that the Jewish people, is making its connection with Torah, and that Torah never ends. And then you go back to the beginning, and that profound message, which is lived out, in such concrete terms. That the moment that you lift the Torah up at the end of Vizot HaBracha, and you place the new Torah down with Breshit, and so there's that little gap, that little moment where you're not in the book, but you know that you're starting over. And that is just so deeply symbolic of eternity. That I think that's the most important moment in Jewish life. That and the end of Yom Kippur.
No, the end of Yom Kippur. This one is a great moment, no question.
The end of Yom Kippur, and I give it a story about this, so it's in my mind. So the moment you sit down to the Seder.
Okay? Yes, that's what I was going to say. Kiddush at the Seder, Avadim Hayinu L'Far B'Mitzrayim, Adonai Hu Elohim at the end of Yom Kippur, and the taking away the old Torah, bring the new one.
It's really, these are the liminal moments.
Those three moments all speak to us differently, because Kol Nidre is individual, Pesach is the family, and Simchat Torah is the community. Because
absolutely,
100%. Simchat Torah, this is the community of Torah. Whoever comes to our synagogue and celebrates Simchat Torah, that's our Torah community.
It's also, but the Torah community stands in for the whole people. There's that's the claim we're making. We who are She'erita Pleita, the people who are kind of remnant, the surviving remnant of the synagogue-going community during, the COVID pandemic. We are present in this lived space as ritual beings. Our ritual selves are present as something very profound is happening that, forgive me for saying, you just can't get on a screen. It's just not the same experience. I keep going back to this. It's emotional. We're living in different emotional chords at the end of the year, and we okay. So just to recap, we have this great Kohelet, statement, the Hoshanah Rabbah, the catharsis, Shminatsarit, a kind of completion, and here joy, but the joy comes with everything. That's why it's.
So, Elliot, just to emphasize what you're saying, the last 3 days, Hoshanah Rabbah, Shminatsarit, and Simchat Torah, are synagogue holidays.
They are synagogue holidays.
Right? The Sukkah we have at home, but the celebration has to be also in the synagogue.
Absolutely.
I think you said that very well.
But what's funny about what you guys just said is that Simchat Torah does have, its place in Jewish observance. Obviously, what we said about the poetic quality of ending the Torah, beginning the Torah, very, very powerful stuff. But Simchat Torah as a day, it's certainly not. It doesn't play the same role in the synagogue-going Jewish community. Like you said, this is the Torah community, the synagogue-going Jewish community. Empirically speaking, I don't think that that's quite true. It's usually a weekday, and not that many people, perhaps take off, and the night before is certainly, typically bigger. Whereas Yom Kippur, and I would say Kol Nidre for me is not the moment. It's Shema Yisrael, Adonai Hu Elohim, which this year we did outside, which was great. The Hoshanah Rabbah Yerushalayim. It was very intense. And I like to think that, in a community of sophisticated New York Jews who, never can say anything about, well, this is about the God that I'm not sure I believe in. At Adonai Hu Elohim, everybody is connected to a moment of worship. And Pesach being the high holiday of the home. It's like the Yom Kippur is the high holiday of the synagogue, and Pesach the high holiday of the home. I'm not exactly sure. Simchat Torah, the way we talked about it, I sort of feel like is more for those of us who are like Torah students rather than the ongoing wider life of the community.
No, I disagree with that. I'm sorry. It's not about students at all. It's the pulse of the people. It's the people holiday. And the only way that the people celebrates its life, its eternity, is by identifying itself with the continuity of generations, the continuity of Torah. And so, and like we don't study on that day. There's no studying going on that day. I mean, it's not, Shavuos is the scholar, rabbi, study, student day. Fine. But this is like the breakout into song, celebrate. You're alive. That's what it is. You're alive. You made it. It's the end. And look at where we are. We're starting off a new year. It's all open to us. Look at, and the joy is in potential. We celebrate the end. We're celebrating the end of a cycle. All of us, the three of us, we've been with our viewers, our listeners, and we shared Torah with them. And so now, I'm looking forward to another year. I can't wait. It's, we've been through so many different places and themes and wonderful stories and reminiscences and recollections. That's bring it on. Simchas Torah.
Bring it on. I think I'm going to go this year.
I think you're going to go in person. Okay. Well, with that, we want to wish. I think it's the real new year. Simchas Torah is the real new year. Starting Torah again. We can't wait to do that with everybody. We want to thank you all for watching, for being with us another year. Wow. What a great pleasure. What a great privilege it is to have been able to have these conversations and to share and to get your feedback and to enjoy that. We want to wish everyone a wonderful Yom Tov, a wonderful Simchas Torah. Hey, we look forward to seeing you Shabbos Bereshit.
We'll be there.
Moadim v'simcha.
Moadim v'simcha, everybody.
Amen. Bye-bye.